In 1 minute, everything can change like it did for my friend Nikki. She was witty, smart, and she happened to do drugs just once a week. For just one day, she would forget about that comment her teacher made, or how her mom doesn't like to clean the house anymore, or how it rained. That one day, she decided to do something nice with her hair. As time went on, Nikki's life became a balancing act, having to balance school, friends, work, and she started smoking 3 to 4 times a week instead. And then eventually, Nikki decided to just drop it all. She lost everything but the weed, and I was still her friend when she was expelled from school, lost her friends, and didn't come back. As a bystander to Nikki's unfortunate turn of events, I was able to see how the school and the student body dealt with her expulsion. For days, I wouldn't stop hearing about who Nikki was or how her life must have been pretty low for her to get that high. And the school labeled her as another misfit junkie, neglecting to use her smarts and her talent to her fullest potential. Now, this may be the story of my friend Nikki, but it's also one shared by several students in our district who get labeled as blemishes in our flawless society. Now, I know a lot about blemishes, and I also know that the one on my chin is very different than the one on my cheek. But I also know that with the proper treatment, each one has the ability to heal. And so I'm here to tell you that I went out and I set out to interview several students in our district. And although it was insightful and at times horrifying, it was a great way for me to get a glimpse into each one of these students' lives, so I could see how they've justified their drug use. And I've also gathered some misconceptions that we tend to have. The first misconception is that every drug user smokes weed. Now, Nikki actually went out and purchased 2 capsules of acid within the first few months of her doing drugs. And she said it was the scariest thing she'd ever experienced. They were $50 a piece. Another student would go out with his best friend in the back of his gas-powered house and inhale the fumes coming out of the pipes. He said he would get so high that the next day he'd wake up with a sprained wrist and not remember how it happened. Another student would consistently sneak out to a hookah bar and never be asked how old he was, while another one of my friends would snort ADHD pills that didn't even belong to her. Another misconception you could probably have is that all these students, they get together and they're all addicted beyond all hope. Well, addiction is actually a disorder caused by compulsive drug use, and it's actually really rare. It's when the urge to smoke is so strong that you try to deny it or rationalize it. Like I said, this might be true for some people, but for others, it's a lot less professional. One student explained that the urge for her to smoke is as strong as having to go to the movie theater. It's pleasant, but also unnecessary. You may also be thinking that all these students, they started smoking because a sketchy stranger offered them a joint in the back of a really sketchy alley. Actually, 2 of the students that I interviewed started because their older siblings got them into it. That means that their older siblings were the one that made the offer and the ones that they shared the first experience with. That means that Nikki's first time, it wasn't some sketchy stranger. Her first time was actually at a New Year's Eve party. And I couldn't help but ask myself, what was I doing on that New Year's Eve of 2010 when Nikki was off changing her life? And you're probably also thinking that all these students are ashamed of themselves and they all hide out in secrecy because they're so ashamed of what they do. Well, actually, one of the interviews that I was doing at a coffee shop, the student stopped me mid-sentence so she could excuse herself for a cigarette. This was a 16-year-old girl going out in broad daylight to get her fix for the day. Well, what's interesting about that is that her parents know about her drug use. And you're probably wondering that too. Don't her parents know? Do they not care? Well, this one in particular said that her parents have caught her with drugs. She's gotten grounded for it. And just a few weeks later, she'd be back on it again. So the cycle keeps going because her parents don't really know what to do. And you're probably wondering about that DARE program, the one that we all have to take in middle school. Well, I got the perspective of some of the students on that too, and they agreed that they felt that DARE was ignorant people telling them about things they themselves didn't understand. And you're probably appalled, how could they think that if DARE is a school-run program, then it must work? But the students don't feel that way because the police officer doesn't come in and tell us, weed is bad for your memory, kids. I know that from experience, so we can relate to it. Instead, they say, weed is bad for your memory, kids. Just look at that drawing on page 6. And there's a difference there. So if all these blemishes are so different, why does the school treat them so similarly? Honestly, I don't think the school's trying to do that on purpose. I just think it's a way to keep the rest of the students safe. But the resources that they have for us, such as DARE or such as the counselors, just isn't really effective anymore. So you have all these blemishes, right? So we need to come up with a system to change that a little bit. because no one ever wonders what happened to Nikki after she was expelled. It turns out she's gone on to get a full-time job. She's working on her degree in psychology before any of her other classmates have even graduated high school. And on top of that, she's also a very strong-willed vegan. But it breaks my heart to know that when I ask about Nikki in the hallways, everyone always thinks, oh, wasn't that one girl that got expelled for using marijuana? She's just another blemish. According to adolescent drug rehabs, 43% of high school seniors have used marijuana within the last year. All right, 50% have used some sort of drug altogether. If that were here, that means 175 students in my graduating class alone have used marijuana. 22% of them have done that between the last 4 weeks. So 77 of my friends have used drugs within the last month. That seems like a really large number, right? And it'd be really hard to have to interview every single one. But difficulty doesn't mean that it's impossible. So here's my plan, all right? We have Nikki, all right? And let's start at the very beginning of her story. She's witty, smart, involved in school, and on top of that, she does drugs once a week. As time goes on, Nikki's life becomes a balancing act, having to balance school, work, friends, and she starts smoking 3 to 4 times a week instead. Well, Nikki does a mistake and she brings the drugs to school. But fortunately, she's caught. So she's taken down to the office. But before she's expelled, she's told to sit in an interview with a counselor and also someone known as a drug mentor, a student who was in her same situation just months prior to this incident. And so as the interviews go on, the counselor finds out that Nikki is incredibly smart, so dealing with her situation would be different than dealing with others. And so Nikki does go through a tough road because she gets in trouble with the school, and her parents do punish her. And they know exactly how to because they also spoke with the school counselor. But as time goes on, Nikki comes back to school. She gets back in the loop of things with the help of her very close friends. And she's able to graduate high school and go on to college, where her access to drugs is a lot less limited. But since she got that attention early on in high school, she knows exactly how to deal with it now. So let's take this one step further. You remember that student I told you about who couldn't sit through a half-hour interview with me because she needed a cigarette? Well, she gets called down to the office too. And she's told to sit in an interview with her counselor and the mentor, who happens to be the boy who used inhalants in the back of that gas-powered house. Well, it turns out they're both incredibly bad test takers, so that B- in English class is really stressing them out. So they would normally go to drugs to help them with that stress. But now they have each other. And as that relationship gets better between the two, they know how to deal with the problem together. So that bond between counselor, mentor, and student isn't something to be laughed at anymore in a 90s sitcom, but rather something to be proud of in our own hallways. That personal attention that each student is getting, that second of attention that they're able to listen to their problems, it's turning them from blemishes into birthmarks, something that other students can look at with awe and realize that when you have a tough story, there's always someone there to listen to it and take your story and make it a better one. Thank you.